This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Latirzo, former fighter, part-time writer, full-time observer, joined by co-host, former 6-term president of the BWAA, Boxing Writers Association of America, Jack Hirsch. And Jack, before you say anything, let me just say this. I'm right outside of Philadelphia. This place is going crazy. The Eagles have their home opener in an hour. They play the Vikings. Historically, they own the Vikings. I think the Eagles are going to have a big night, and the Super Bowl chant and talk will begin, and I will have to turn off all Philadelphia media for a while.
Well, Frank, let me start off by wishing you a happy birthday. It is your birthday, right, Frank?
Here comes the punchline. No.
No, but that's what my wife told me. She saw it. She saw it online. So she got it wrong. Okay,
my birthday's in April.
Birthday. What? Okay, Frank, got that one wrong. Okay, that's a blooper on the air. Frank, all we did was talk football before the show. No boxing, no preparation here for this show. I know, you're like a quarterback that's a gunslinger. You don't really like the play set, and you'll go to the line of scrimmage. You'll just send the receivers out and take a look who's open and just sling the ball.
Jack, this is a down time these last couple of weeks. There's really not that much going on other than talking about fights that we thought were made, that might be made, that have been canceled. And look, next weekend, we have the rematch with Joyce and Zhang. We can do some of that tonight. In 2 weeks, we probably have a big anticipated fight between Canelo and Jermell Charlo. There's a lot of interest in that. Some people think it'll be easy for Canelo. I happen to think that Charlo is going to put up a good fight. But other than that, there's really not that much going on.
Well, the anticipation of big fights, you could talk about it weeks before. But after a while, you become like all talked out. Even like the Terrence Crawford situation, he's now holding out for more money if the fight's going to take place at 154 pounds, because that's where Spence wants it to take place at, because it would give Spence a better chance of winning, or at least making a better showing than he did the first fight, than to risk being weight drained. Crawford wants to fight at 154 himself, but he has the upper hand. But
nobody thinks about, Jack, that Crawford might even be better at 154.
Exactly. But the point is this: Crawford could be holding out for the fight to be 154. And imagine Spence says, no, I don't want to give you more money. I get X amount, and if I lose, I could cash out. That's my golden parachute, the few million extra, whatever. And he could decide he's going to fight at 147. And you want to know something? Crawford loses. I mean, it's like lose in a sense, because if you fight at 154, you're fighting under the terms of the contract. He wants to get a better deal, which is his right, because he gets to select 147, 154, but they're going to be less pay-per-view buys. I think a little less if they fight at 147 as opposed to 154.
I agree.
Spence may have been weight drained, and what's he doing fighting at 147 again? We're not going to be as anxious to see the rematch. And even though virtually everyone is picking Crawford to beat Spence decisively again, the rematch could still do good business, because Spence has enough of a pedigree and enough of a reputation where people might think in the back of their mind, well, maybe he just had an off night. You never know.
Jack, and if they sign the fight at 54, which they probably will, we'll hear things after that how Spence was eating 200 calories a day to make 147. They'll overplay it so the public will buy. Man, really, he really was compromised. And maybe that's why we saw the fight that we saw.
Yeah.
And maybe this time it'll be different. But again, as I said, Crawford might even be stronger at 54. And you know what I like that came out this week, Jack? Did you see how both Danny Garcia and Keith Thurman, guys that one walked down the street with Crawford before the Spence fight, now they are talking about they'll fight him. And he said, nope, you lost your shot. When I was a nobody and you guys talked about certain sides of the street and such, or I got a sign with PBC, you wanted nothing to do with me. Now that I'm the top dog, no, I'm not gonna feed you a big payday. And you know what? I like that.
I like it too. I mean, Danny Garcia reportedly has held on to his money, but it's a cash out fight. He fights Terrence Crawford. He gets a good payday, even if the payday is something like $3 million compared to Crawford's $12 million or $15 million. I'm just throwing numbers, okay? He gets the type of big payday that might even be the biggest payday of his career just to lose. Okay.
I agree, Jack. And you know what?
No one is giving Danny Garcia much of a chance against Crawford. Same thing with Keith Thurman. He's been so inactive. He avoided Errol Spence, never showed an interest to fight Crawford. But in all fairness, a Thurman's Crawford fight was never really too much in the works. Spence was the one that was Crawford's weight because Crawford came up from junior welterweight when Thurman was a welterweight. So it wasn't that much talked about at the time. But if I'm the Errol Spence, why would I ever want to fight Thurman? Thurman ducked Spence for the longest time.
Absolutely. And Crawford holds all the cards now, and these guys froze him out. And I can see where he doesn't want to be their cash out fight. I don't think there's any interest in either fight. We both know that he would take Keith Thurman and Danny Garcia apart. Danny Garcia, I like and respect. He's held on to his money. I know he has some businesses inside of Philadelphia that he does well. But look, if it's $3 million, $4 million, or $5 million, it's $5 million more than he had. Who can walk away from that? But the funny thing with Crawford is, Jack, if somehow the Spence rematch doesn't get made and Charlo loses to Canelo in 2 weeks, what does Crawford do then? Fight the Mendoza Zoo winner, or does he fight Boots Ennis?
Well, that's an interesting point, Frank. What do you think? Do you think it has to be Ennis next?
I think Crawford, not to lose face, either has to fight the best available junior middleweight, Spence or Boots. If he takes any fight outside of one of those three, I think he's open to criticism. Unless somebody makes him an off the books offer to fight Thurman.
If Charlo beats Canelo, they have a rematch clause. So why would Charlo even be entertaining a fight with Crawford? And he shouldn't if he beats Canelo. If he loses to Canelo, he's not exactly damaged goods, but a Crawford fight with Charlo would lose some appeal, let's be honest.
It absolutely would.
It would. Okay, so Charlo isn't that much in the equation. If Crawford doesn't fight Boots Ennis, and he's fighting a Danny Garcia, a Keith Thurman, let's say he decides he's going to fight one of those guys, that means he's ducking Boots Ennis. I don't want to.
He would have a hard time justifying, Jack. I agree.
You know,
he would have a hard time justifying those guys over Boots, because let's face it, after Crawford, Boots is considered the next best guy in the division. So to me, Crawford, if he doesn't fight Boots and the Charlo fight doesn't happen, he's got to fight Zoo or the Zoo Mendoza winner to, so he doesn't take any heat.
The Sue Mendoza winner, at least we could say Crawford has moved up a weight division. So it makes it a viable fight. He's debuted.
And he's fighting a real guy.
And a good opponent. So we give him a complete pass. But if he's going to fight at 147, even fighting Thurman at 154, Garcia at 154, imagine one of the sanctioning bodies makes it for their vacant title at 154, Thurman and Crawford. I don't want to know from Keith Thurman. I think he's a complete fraud. A complete
I agree, Jack.
fraud. He stays on the shelf. He's hardly fought the last few years, and he's like he feels he's entitled. What the heck is he entitled to? Nothing.
Again, the only way Crawford gets a pass on that is if he is offered some kind of crazy money that he couldn't get anywhere else, and it's off the chart. Other than that, that fight doesn't draw. And Jack, speaking of Crawford, you probably thought we were going to talk about this later, but it's just the way the show's unfolding. You told me you wanted to address something that came up the last show about Crawford if he lost to Canelo and the difference between the great and all-time great. So if you want to clarify what you said, what you meant, go ahead.
There's something, I saw in the social media posts, something I said about being a legendary fighter. And when I talk about legendary fighter, I'm saying someone that's on Mount Rushmore, a select few who are true legends. And when I said Crawford's legacy would be hurt by losing to Canelo, I didn't mean his current status would be hurt, okay? As a pound-for-pound claimant, not necessarily that. Crawford is trending towards legendary status. Few fighters have legendary status. They're in one small group. They're like immortals, okay? The Muhammad Alis, the Joe Lewises, okay?
Robinson.
Sure, absolutely. I'll give you an idea of an all-time great fighter who's not on Mount Rushmore. Just an example, nothing more. The great Alexis Arguello. He's not on Mount Rushmore as one of the few all-time greats. You could put Roberto Duran there. You could put Sugar Ray Leonard there. But you want to know something? Tommy Hearns comes a little short, even though he's one of the
I was thinking that exact same thing.
He comes a little short. A lot of people would put Hagler on Mount Rushmore because of how he was as a middleweight his whole career. He was smart enough to stay in one division. He left his mark. So you could maybe put Hagler maybe on Mount Rushmore too with the rest of them. Harry Greb. That's what I mean.
But Jack, don't you think
Canelo and got stopped? He's not on Mount Rushmore right now. But if he beats Canelo and continues on the way he's been for 2-3 more years, he becomes a Mount Rushmore fighter, one of the true all-time greats.
Is Larry Holmes on Mount Rushmore?
I would feel, he could have a seat there. He could have a seat there.
He lost to Michael Spinks when he was 36 years old the first time. I think that fight was scored correctly. He lost to a guy who moved up and fought a guy 50 pounds bigger than any opponent he ever fought. When Michael Spinks went in the ring with Larry Holmes was 221 pounds.
Okay, I can counter your argument very easily.
Go ahead.
Very easily, okay? Bob Foster, who has a better light heavyweight resume than Michael Spinks. Bob Foster's not.
Jack, I totally disagree with that.
He got obliterated moving up as a heavyweight.
Jack, on that premise, you're wrong. Why does Bob Foster have a better resume? He lost as a light heavyweight. Let me finish. He lost as a light heavyweight to Mario Mina, and Spinks never lost at light heavyweight, and he clearly beat better fighters at light heavyweight than Bob Foster did.
The Mina fight was a fiasco that he officially lost in Argentina. They saved Mina reportedly from a knockout. Let me put it another way, Frank. If you ask the majority of people who they would rate as a greater light heavyweight, not as a greater fighter, Foster or Spinks, more would vote for Foster over Spinks. But if you ask who is a greater overall fighter, maybe Spinks would get the edge then because of what he did as a heavyweight.
Jack, Keep talking because I want to see where they finished in eyebrow. I just punched it up. I want to see where who finished higher, Foster or Spinks at light heavyweight. All right, here we go. Bob Foster 5, Michael Spinks 6.
I mean, that's
451 to 434 votes.
You can make a better argument by saying, well, look at Roy Jones, his losses late in his career. It's all according to circumstance. When Holmes fought Michael Spinks, he was past his peak. He was still good, but past his peak. Okay.
He was 35 years old.
But age is different for fighters. Terence Crawford right now is in his prime. We don't know how much longer he's going to hold his prime. Obviously, if he got knocked out by Canelo and then lost the fight after that, then obviously he either passed his prime, or we're going to say the Spence fight, was a bit of an aberration, that maybe he really wasn't as great as we thought he was after he beat Spence. So there's so much riding over that. He doesn't have a free pass the way Ali may have had against Larry Holmes.
No, but I don't think that Larry Holmes had one against Spinks. Did Spinks beat Prime Holmes? No, he did not. But that fight sealed it for Spinks. I don't think it hurt Holmes. And if Crawford lost a decision to Canelo, I don't think it would hurt his legacy. And when you talk about Mount Rushmore, look, Mount Rushmore is only 4. We can't do that in boxing. So let's say the Mount Rushmore of each division, okay? So let's say the top 4. Well, Hagler makes it at middleweight. Ray Leonard makes it at welterweight. I think Tommy Hearns makes it also at welterweight. I can't say as good and as great as I think Crawford is. I don't think there's anything he could do, Jack, that could convince me that when he retires, he's one of the 5 greatest welterweights of all time. I just don't think that's out there. We'll have to see what he does. If he were to beat Boots and maybe move up and beat Ortiz and Mendoza, that might close the gap. But I just don't think losing to Canelo, unless he was mutilated, would hurt his legacy as a pound-for-pound fighter or as a welterweight, because Canelo is also considered that, and he is basically the fighter of this generation.
But Frank, that ship is already sailed as far as rating guys according to divisions. A case in point would be Roy Jones Jr. We don't have a division to really rate him in. And I could make an argument very easily that Roy Jones is a greater fighter than Marvin Hagler. But Hagler was a career middleweight, so his status goes up. We could rate him as one of the greatest middleweights of all time. Roy Jones didn't stay in one particular division where he could leave his mark in it the way Hagler did.
You don't think he did it at light heavyweight? I think he did at light heavyweight. He cleaned the division out.
Well, he cleaned all the divisions out. Middleweight,
But he only had a couple of title defenses at middleweight, Jack. And super middleweight.
With John Ruiz, the one fight. I mean, you rate a guy, I think, kind of like as a pound-for-pound claimant. Okay? Like how he is pound for pound. I mean, that's what made Roberto Duran so great. Duran lost a number of fights late in his career. Obviously, his prime ended in Montreal when he beat Leonard the first fight. He was never the same after that. Never the same at all.
That's his signature win.
Yeah, that's a signature win.
And one of the best wins by any fighter of our lifetime.
Right, exactly. But my thing, Terence Crawford hasn't quite gotten up to that status. Canelo said something that, is mad as it made me in the beginning, may have had a little logic to it. I mean, I hate to admit it because Canelo's a whiner. He's a complainer.
Don't tell me you're going to go where I think you're going.
Right,
go ahead.
But what he said, outside of Spence, who is Crawford beat? Now, to me, Crawford's the best fighter in boxing, pound for pound. So I'm not selling him short. I've always been a big Terence Crawford booster and a believer. And I did pick him to stop Spence, but not in the fashion he did. But when you look at Crawford, it's basically body of work. Outside of Spence, he really didn't have any defining names on his record. That's why
Give
he
me
left him
Canelo's
out.
defining win, Jack.
Well, you make a point with Canelo. I mean, Canelo. Okay, the Golovkin fight was controversial. The second fight,
But
okay,
Jack, he clearly lost the first fight.
he clearly lost.
I don't
the
know
first
anyone
fight.
that thought that Canelo won the first fight. You know, Canelo, I read where he said that, but you know what? If you go back, and I've done it, and you look at the guys that Crawford's fought, no one has beat them as decisively as he has. He's retired a lot of them, and they were never close fights. He was never close to losing. And then when you look at the way he operates in the ring and his versatility and his finishing ability and how he can go both sides, it's like, Jack, do you realize that we can pick apart, aside from maybe Harry Greb and Sam Langford, we can pick apart everybody's record. And I know you were around when this was going on, but I'm going to take the most famous name in the sport, and that's Ali. And Jack, I remember the late 60s and the 70s, and guys like Bill Gallo and guys from the Ring magazine that were writers, and even the Burt Sugars of the world, and definitely Fleischer, they said Ali was fighting nobodies. When did all of a sudden his opponents got good, Jack, after he retired, and nobody even teased that Ali was the greatest until after he beat Foreman.
So Floyd Patterson, Ernie Terrell, and nobody.
Jack,
come on, those guys didn't like Ali at that time.
Jack, okay, you're right about that, but wait a second. Terrell was basically a big mummy with a left jab, who his wins were close decisions over Chuvalo and Doug Jones. Everybody said that Liston was 40 years old when Ali beat him, and they think Liston took a dive in the second fight. Patterson was a blown-up light heavyweight. So if you look at Ali's guys in the 60s, who was the best guy he beat?
I don't go for that argument. You could pick any opponent apart, and you could discredit their victory.
That's my argument, Jack, but that's what they said about Ali at the time. That's what they were saying at the time.
Weight against Robinson when he lost his middleweight title. You can make up stuff about anyone at all.
That's my point, but that's the argument you're using against Crawford, and Canelo using it to me is a joke.
I'm saying as far as big names, that's why he left Top Rank, because he couldn't get the big fights. But Crawford has done everything possible against the guys he's been put in with. He's performed brilliantly, hasn't been in any close fights. And it's just something that Canelo said, but you threw the argument back at Canelo. Canelo is ducking Crawford, make no mistake about it, but Crawford isn't going to have any sympathy for me if he doesn't fight Boots Ennis, because he seems to be avoiding Boots. He's coming up with the same argument, well, who's Boots beaten? The bottom line is this, Frank. We want to see Crawford fight Boots Ennis. If the public wants it, we should get it. I don't want to hear we're giving the fans what they want. That's what Spence.
Well, they always say that. Mayweather said that after every fight.
They weren't giving the fans what they wanted. They were cashing out at a point. They had no one else to fight at that point. Spence, who ducked Crawford for the longest time, finally came to the table. He decided, big paydays, giant money, I'm going to take it.
Let me ask you this. If you were the king of boxing and you could deem any fighter for Crawford to fight in his next fight, who would you want to see him fight?
Boots Ennis.
All right. For me, it would be, again, it can't happen. For me, it would be Jermell Charlo at 154. If I can't get that, I'll go with Boots.
No. There's a difference involved. We both know Crawford beats Charlo at 154.
I don't know that.
You're pretty
confident. I think it, Jack, but I think Charlo has the goods to give him trouble, and he's the bigger guy, and he can punch and box, and he takes a good punch.
You're telling me you would give Charlo a decent chance of beating Crawford?
Yes. I would pick Crawford, but Jack, I don't know if I bet much money on it.
You see,
I
with
can't be any more
Ennis-
honest than that.
Boots Ennis, I feel, represents a much greater threat to Crawford than Charlo would. I wouldn't
Okay.
discount Charlo's chances, but I'm pretty confident, Crawford beats him. Very extremely confident. With Boots
Well,
Ennis, yeah.
let me
I'm
break
not
that
so
down.
sure.
Charlo has fought better opposition than Boots. He's more experienced against top level guys. He's a harder puncher. I know he has a chin. I know he's a mean dude and a good finisher. I think Boots is the next guy, Jack. But right now, I would probably pick Jermell to beat Boots also. But I think that's a tougher fight for Crawford than Boots is. I think Crawford has the experience over Boots, and I think if they fight in their next fight, Crawford wins. Not a guarantee, but I pick him to win. But I can see his point, Jack, why he is a little bit hesitant in that fight, because now he wants to fight for legacy. Beating Boots Ennis does nothing for his legacy, because everybody will say, who did Boots beat? At least they can't say that about Charlo. He cleaned out the junior middleweight division.
But do you agree, if Charlo loses to Canelo, he's off the table as far as fighting Crawford next?
For two reasons. He lost, and I believe, if depending on what he weighs for the Canelo fight, I believe getting back down to 154 could hurt him a little bit, and I think that would favor Crawford more. So if Charlo doesn't win, I don't want to see Charlo and Crawford fight.
We have a scoop here. Frank Laterzo going out on the limb, I could tell, and is going to pick Charlo to beat Canelo when we come up with our final prediction the week of the fight.
I don't know if that's true, but I'm not ruling it out.
Okay, but if you had labeled a Crawford Canelo fight, you didn't maybe use these words, so correct me if I'm wrong, kind of a bit of a fiasco. You didn't want it to take place because of the weight differences. But Crawford, if once he signs the fight at 154, meaning it could be against Spence, he's then a legitimate junior middleweight from now on. That means he's left the welterweight division.
Yes.
Is there anything now, would anything be wrong with the Canelo Crawford fight, under that scenario? If he's 154 pounds, he's no longer welterweight.
Yes, Canelo still has the edge, Jack. Canelo has fought at light heavyweight a couple times. Canelo is clearly 20 pounds bigger.
Let me put it another way. If we had the traditional 8-weight divisions, do you agree Canelo would be a middleweight, not a light heavyweight?
Wow, that's interesting, Jack.
And Crawford, who's a welterweight, would be moving up to middleweight?
I think if middleweight was the limit, Jack, he'd probably stay at 47.
You really think he wouldn't, with making weight, he wouldn't take the guys on at 160?
I mean, he might do that, Jack. I just think at 160, he's not a middleweight. Canelo, I mean,
we're talking about Canelo. Whatever happened to Dimitri Bivol?
We know that's not going to happen again. He doesn't want him.
No, I'm not saying that. Who is Bivol going to be fighting? Lyndon Northeye here. Okay, the guy who beat Anthony Yarde and then lost to him in a rematch. I mean, it's like Bivol certainly didn't cash in on his victory over Canelo.
No, it's a shame.
Bivol was unreasonable during negotiations.
Well, he wanted to offer them the same $5 million, and that's crazy.
And and you want to know something, Frank? If Bivol would have said, yes, I'll take the offer to $5 million, I don't think Canelo would have fought him.
I think that's plausible.
$3 million. He says, no, not $5 million, $3 million. He would have made it impossible for Bivol to take the fight.
All right, we beat Crawford to death, Jack. Let's talk about a fight that we thought we were going to see, and we're now.
We got there's an anniversary fight that deserves big play, Frank.
Okay, we'll get to that. Shakur Stevenson was supposed to fight Frank Martin. Now, I don't know all the details of what was signed, what wasn't, but it was pretty much accepted that they were going to fight. And then a couple of days after that, after everybody was all psyched up, which I was never psyched up about it because I always thought it was a bad fight for Martin, the fight fell through. Am I right so far?
Yeah, well, you're right in what sense?
That they were supposed to fight. It looked like it was going to fight, and then Martin pulled out.
But whose fault is it truly? We don't know what goes on behind the scenes completely, but from what I gathered was this. Shakur Stevenson was acting like he was the champion. He's not the lightweight champion of the world. What kind of nonsense is this? He's fighting for a vacant belt against Frank Martin, but Shakur Stevenson wanted something like 5 times the amount of money. From what I understood, he would be guaranteed it would be making $5 million to Frank Martin's $1 million. And why would Martin do it? It's for the vacant title. If it was Devin Haney defending the lightweight belts, Devin Haney then could have said, I'm the true lightweight champ. So he gets the lion's share of the money. Stevenson shouldn't get the lion's share of the money. Should he get more than Martin, a 60-40 split based on pedigree, reputation? I'm fine with that. But Shakur Stevenson was acting like I'm the big attraction. You're lucky to get $1 million to fight me, so you just take it. And Martin's thinking, no, I'm a pretty hot prospect. I'm unbeaten. You're not the champion. You shouldn't get 5 times the amount of money that I'm getting. I don't blame Frank Martin on that. And if Stevenson wanted it bad enough, work something out to the point if there's $6 million there, I get 3.5, 6 million in the pot. I get 3.5. You get 2.5 to make the fight happen. And then when Stevenson wins the lightweight championship, and he's the true title holder, then he could demand, such a big disparity. He can do it against Edwin De Los Santos, the guy he's fighting next, because that's basically a no name. But Frank Martin's one of the hot prospects in boxing. I don't blame Martin for taking, when they get compensated.
I have 2 thoughts on that. One, I think it's too early for Frank Martin. So the only way the fight would make sense is again, if he was getting a king's ransom, and apparently $1 million, that's not a king's ransom. So to me, I think it makes sense because they can't justify with the money because the money's not that great. And let's face it, Shakur is much more seasoned, and I think Frank Martin's really good, but he's much more seasoned than him. And the other thing I think, Jack, in the back of Martin's mind, there's talk that maybe he's going to fight Tank. And Tank would be for much more money. It would be for a title, and it's a more winnable fight. So I think that could be what they're looking at.
And Tank fights really for the PBC. Martin fights for the PBC. Stevenson fights for Top Rank. There may have been some dealings behind the scenes. I can only speculate, no evidence, and I'm not saying it necessarily took place. The PBC may have seen, we're allowing him to fight a top-ranked fighter. Supposedly, they ironed everything out. But if they ironed everything out behind the scenes, the way they said they did, wasn't Frank Martin part of the discussion, being told all along how much money you're getting compared to Shakur Stevenson? That's the most basic question. If I'm a fight, I want to know.
That's what they want to know.
How much is he getting? I want to know that before I agree to it, before you start negotiating for a fight, a venue and a date. I got to know what I'm getting paid first and foremost compared to my opponent. So something went on where someone got cold feet. Could it have been Frank Martin? Maybe it was Frank Martin. Shakur Stevenson's a nightmare to fight. He's a great fighter. His style is so difficult to crack. And
I agree.
The people around him thought, we have an elite prospect on our hands, and we're not putting him against, a Shakur.
Especially for $1 million. But if he gets $5 million to fight Tank for a title, that's the fight I would take. And again, Jack, it's or I don't want to say easier. I think it's more winnable. I think Martin matches up better with Tank than he does Shakur. Nobody matches up with Shakur, but I think that would be the better business move. And that, and like you said, it's easier to make. So that's probably what's going on there.
Yeah, I would think so. But I was surprised Martin took the fight to begin with, reportedly. But I don't see it happening now. I don't see them getting back together in any point in the near future.
All right, before we get into the big anniversary fight, let's just touch a couple things on heavyweight. Number one, Jack, it doesn't look good that Joshua and Wilder are going to fight at the end of this year or early next year. Would you agree?
Yeah, why haven't they signed by now? All this talk, investors, Saudi Arabia. You either make the fight or you don't. I don't know what they're thinking, Eddie Hearn, in regards to Joshua, but it might be getting to the point where Eddie Hearn is going to think, and maybe Joshua's, well, we want to cash out.
Well, that would be the fight, wouldn't it? That would be a huge fight.
No, Tyson Fury would do the best business by far. You put in, the UK, Joshua against Fury. It would go off the charts. The country,
but he's such a wild card, Jack. How could you plan your future around him? Because we don't know what he's going to do. He's got this stupid MMA thing coming up. He's talking about doing another one against John Jones. Usyk doesn't seem to be on the radar. It's like with Fury, I don't know what's going on, and I don't think anybody does. He may not even know. Or if I'm Joshua, everybody in the U.S., the U.K., they want to see he and Wilder fight. They would probably both get $40 million. That's a nice cash out fight for a guy that's already made over $100 million. And Wilder's made about $50 million.
Joshua's a big attraction. He would get more than Fury. I mean, more than Wilder, excuse me. But Wilder would be paid very handsomely. Let's say, for argument's sake, there was $65 million to split up between the fighters. I really believe Joshua gets 40 and Wilder.
That's about what I would think. Yeah.
And Wilder would be good with it because he's all fighters. Say what you want about him. He just wants to get Joshua in the ring.
He's got to fight, though, Jack. He's been pretty inactive.
Years ago, Joshua called Wilder's bluff by saying, yeah, I'll fight you for $50 million. Then Wilder comes on TV not shortly after. He says, guess what? We got the money, the $50 million for you. No excuses. And Joshua backed out.
They were quiet. You're right.
Yeah. But eventually you want to cash out. It gets to the point, who's Joshua going to fight after a while? Who is he going to fight? Adewale, someone like that? We don't want to see that fight.
I agree. No, he's in a tough spot, too. Because, again, I also think that Joshua is vulnerable to lose to anybody in the top 5 or 6. Okay, I don't think he's a given. And one loss, and that kills it.
Joshua strikes me as the type of fighter who could lose to anyone in the top 50 on a given night. He could unravel for whatever.
I mean, if you're Joshua and you get a chance to fight, Jack, if you're Joshua and you get offered the winner of Zhang and Joyce, are you taking that?
Yeah.
No title?
Joyce, I think Joyce is going to beat Zhang in the rematch next week. And that's going to make a Joshua fight very viable in the UK. It'll do great business because they'll give Joyce if he wins impressively over Zhang.
Well, I'm not sure where I'm going to go in that fight, who I like or who I'm going to pick to win. All right, Jack, before we get to the big fight, the anniversary fight, because it does tie into this, I did a post on Facebook the other day about the 4 great swarmers in heavyweight history.
Oh, Frank, it's 100 years ago today. I don't give a darn about the swarmers.
We have 20 minutes to discuss a fight that went 2 rounds. Okay?
But it's historical, Frank.
And we're going to get to it.
Historical.
And Jack Dempsey is one of those guys that was a swarmer.
Okay, good tie-in.
Okay, so the four great swarmers are Dempsey, Marciano, Frazier, and Tyson. None of those guys were over 6 foot. In fact, Tyson and Marciano were barely 5'10", and they all had to fight as the attacker. They couldn't fight outside. They had to get inside, and all of their fights were exciting. Jack, those guys don't exist anymore. The last guy that we had close to that was David Tua, who peaked in 96, 97. Got one shot at the title, was totally befuddled by Lennox Lewis. And I just think that because of the size of these guys today, and they can gallivant outside with their long reach, we don't see the swarmers. And Jack, that's a lot why we don't see a lot of exciting fights in the heavyweight division, because they're all tall plotters that look for one shot. And I think that hurts the division.
Yeah, you make a really good point, Frank. I mean, the heavyweights, you go Lennox Lewis, Vladimir Klitschko, Larry Holmes, they controlled the ring with their jab. It was a question of controlling the ring as opposed to a Joe Frazier, Marciano, a Dempsey, who's a swarmer. But somehow I think I understand what you're saying about all of them being swarmers. Dempsey was a swarmer. Frazier was a swarmer. He'd be all over you. Marciano would methodically beat you up. Was he really a swarmer per se? I picture swarmers being moving in very quickly, not methodically.
Marciano inched in, Jack, but my point that with a swarmer, they usually have short arms and they have to fight inside and they have to go forward. And that applies to all four of those guys. Not so much Dempsey. He had a little bit of a reach, but Dempsey was not good when he backed up. Frazier couldn't back up. Rocky couldn't back up. Tyson couldn't back up. Now, if you could back them up, not many could, but if you could, you were in the money. But it's just amazing that, like, we just don't see those guys anymore. I think it hurts the sport, and those were some of my favorite fighters to watch. But, Jack, seriously, could you see Marciano or Dempsey or Frazier or even Tyson fighting Tyson Fury or Lennox Lewis?
Well, they would have grown in size. Their bodies would have adjusted to the time. Actually, Tyson Fury's dad, John Fury, feels Mike Tyson would have beaten his son. And Tyson Fury tries to be nice. He says, no, he would have knocked me out. They idolized Mike Tyson. He was named after him. And it's amazing the way the dad swears by Mike Tyson.
And then he called him out to fight a couple days ago.
Those fighters would have grown in size. I mean, how do you make like a comparison? I mean, back in the day, a giant was like someone like Jess Willard, who weighed 245. That was a massive guy. But size does matter. I mean, it took Joe Louis 13 rounds to chop down Abe Simon because Abe Simon was so big. So it does have an effect, size, a major effect, even though they say it doesn't mean much with heavyweights. I believe it does.
Well, because of the size, Jack, and all the four guys I mentioned that were always in great shape. That's why we got great fights. I think that style died about 25 years ago. But let's talk about a fight that was 100 years ago, since you beat me up so bad about it. Go ahead. Tell us about the fight, Jack.
100 years ago today, Frank. Today.
Who did you pick to win that fight, Jack?
1923. I picked Louis Angel Firpo by a knockout.
And if the press didn't help Dempsey back in the ring, you might have had it right.
No. But what happened in that fight, September 14th, 1923, in the Polo Grounds? I should have looked up what the attendance was. I think it was around 80,000.
It was about 80,000.
If I'm not mistaken there.
It was about 80,000.
First time a fighter from Latin America was challenging for the heavyweight title. Louis Angel Firpo, if I had to compare him, he was an Argentinian boxer, to anyone who modern day people might be able to relate to, even though he's not quite modern, would be Oscar Bonavena.
Oscar Bonavena, right.
That type of fighter. So think of Oscar Bonavena when you think of Louis Angel Firpo. And what happened, Jack Dempsey, like you said, Frank, was the ultimate swarmer. Of all the guys that you mentioned, the four swarmers, I think he would rate number one as a swarmer amongst the four, strictly as a swarmer. Okay? That because Dempsey would swarm all over you immediately. It wouldn't.
He was the fastest starter, no doubt
Yeah,
about that.
right. Okay, so he would swarm on you from the beginning. Fight starts, and Dempsey gets knocked down initially. I believe a flash knockdown. His knee touches the ground. Then he knocks Firpo down 7 times. Imagine that. At one point, Firpo gets up at 9. He looks badly hurt. Dempsey's standing over him, of course. Crazy rule where you didn't have to go to a neutral corner. Somehow, after the 7th knockdown, Firpo starts swinging these clubbing punches wild. He was strong. His nickname was the Wild Bull of the Pampas. And he backs Dempsey into the ropes. So one like overhand right hits Dempsey on the chin. But it seems like with the force, the glove pushed Dempsey too. It was mostly a punch, but I also think it was partly a push, a hard shove. Well, Dempsey goes sailing out of the ring and he lands on a typewriter. He hits the back of his head. His
Gets cut
up in the air head first. Now, say what you want about the old timers. How many fighters today could have absorbed that fall and gotten back in the ring and continued to fight? Frank, I was at a baseball game in 2004 where Derek Jeter made a phenomenal catch. Running top speed, he catches and goes diving into the stands. He gets up from that, goes back on the field. He's walking, he's cut. He walks back to the dugout. That's it for the night. In boxing, you don't have that. You have to continue. There was controversy that Dempsey was aided back into the ring, should have been disqualified. I disagree. First off, no one is ready around ringside for someone landing on you. I was at a fight once in Westchester, Frank. Call the Truth Williams past his prime, fought this fighter, Anthony T-Bone Green, who knocked Williams out of the ring on the table right next to me. I'm just trying to protect myself, going for cover. Okay, so they pushed Dempsey to get Dempsey off them. Like, get up, Jack. Dempsey had to get back in the ring on his own. And keep this in mind for everyone listening. You get knocked out of the ring, it's not a 10 count anymore. You're given a 20 count, according to the rules, to get back in the ring. And they estimated film clips. I never counted it, that it was about 14 seconds before Dempsey entered the ring. He gets back in the ring, he recovers. The round ends early in round 2. Within a minute, he knocks Firpo down twice. The second time for the count, it's over. There's this famous painting by an artist, George Bellows, that shows Firpo knocking Dempsey out of the ring.
That's a cool picture.
Yeah, you see it hung in museums. You see it hung in offices. It's. Would you say, Frank, in your opinion, that's the greatest boxing picture of all time? I know the one near life flow with Ali holding his hand. I think the one with George Bellows is the greatest boxing portrait ever. What do you think?
That's up there. I'd have to think about that, but it's up there. And if you don't know who won the fight, you'd think the guy standing there won the fight and knocked the guy out. That's the funny thing.
Yeah.
Because they showed Firpo standing looking at Dempsey outside the ring.
Yeah, and it showed, and Firpo actually knocked Dempsey out of the ring with a right hand, but it shows his left hand out. We like to talk and joke about the Rocky movies, but now I recall in Rocky 1, the trainer Mickey, he fought on the undercard that night, he claimed. The Dempsey Firpo fight, as I remember, that he got his opponent had nails in the gloves or whatever that night. But in 1950, Frank, they took a vote, the greatest sporting event of the half century, and it was Dempsey Firpo. And now it's kind of lost in history, Frank. Can you imagine in the year? This is hard to imagine, Frank. We won't be around at that time, at least actively as we know it. 77 years from now. 77 years from now, we're beginning a new century. And they talk about the greatest sporting events in history, and Ali Frazier won. That's like, is hardly mentioned. That would be incomprehensible to us. But Dempsey Firpo's been forgotten in time.
You know, a lot of guys, our agents, no, the generation or two after us, they make fun of the old timers, but you can tell watching that fight that had Firpo fought in the 70s, he would have been a factor because he was strong. And you know, you mentioned Bonavina, but I think based on what I saw, I think Firpo was a better puncher than Bonavina.
He was, but Bonavina was a little more durable, I think, a little more.
And yeah, because but Firpo was only stopped what in his last fight? He was stopped by Godoy in his last fight.
Well, that was in 1930s. It was off for 10 years at the end.
Right. And I think he lost his second fight by stoppage. But so he was stopped 3 times, but 2 of them
early in his career doesn't matter.
Yeah,
early in his
right.
career
His second fight and his last fight.
And
then he lost to Wills the year after he fought Dempsey.
Well, Wills was in his prime then, I believe, and he was close to it. And Wills was the fighter that Dempsey avoided, or the people around Dempsey, had him avoid. But Louis Angel Firpo, he wasn't a polished fighter by any means, but
no.
He was before his time. He supposedly had such physical strength, incredible physical strength. And Dempsey just, a sharper, better puncher.
He was exactly. He was the better fighter.
He was the better.
Had better form, everything.
Yeah, and he prevailed. And what made the fight so intriguing was that heavyweight from Latin America, because at that time it was the unknown factor. Firpo was a bit of a matinee idol when he came in, not as much as maybe Georges Carpentier, who fought Dempsey a couple of years before, but there was such charisma surrounding Firpo. I remember Nat Fleischer saying even he remembered when the doctor examined Firpo may have had a hurt arm, a shoulder, and Firpo let out like a little bit of a wince, but he withstood any pain he may have been feeling. Fleischer wasn't mentioning it as an excuse. Fighters would fight injured at that time. I mean, a fighter's hand could have been fractured, and the doctor would know it, and they wouldn't say anything. Fighters
they needed the money too.
Yeah, they fight hurt now all the time. You don't think a doctor's going to come into a dressing room to check a fighter before the fight and say, no, you can't fight. Your hand looks like it's fractured.
Not happening.
The fighter's going to say, is going to have to tell the doctor he has a massive headache. And then the doctor's going to need confirmation for a couple of more minutes. He'll ask him about 5 times. You sure your head hurts? You sure? Because, and then the fighter will say, no, my head feels much better now. The doctor will
Jack,
say, okay.
You know what no one talks about, though? And somebody said this today. Dempsey really was aided by that rule where you didn't have to go to the neutral corner. A couple of times when Firpo got up, he was barely on his feet, and Dempsey was hitting him. Could you imagine George Foreman or Tyson or Sonny Liston with that rule when they fought? You could stand over the guy and crack him before he's on his feet. I mean, look, they could have done that to Dempsey, but nobody put him down. Other than Firpo in a big fight. And Sonny.
That's really interesting. Imagine they allowed it today. The fighter who's down, he could fake a disqualification. He could shield himself with one glove, but keep his knee on the ground and then get hit and say, he hit me when I was down.
Roy Jones got disqualified doing that against Montel Griffin, and George Foreman hit Joe Roman when he was down.
Yeah, I remember Arthur McCanty Sr., who refereed the Mike Tyson-Tony Tubbs fight in Tokyo, told me that Tyson threw an uppercut at Tubbs, at the end of the fight when he was down, saying if Tyson had connected with that,
it just missed.
He said he was going to disqualify Tyson. And I said to him, Arthur, you couldn't disqualify him.
I don't think that was going to happen.
He may have initially disqualified him, and then the commissions and everything, they would have gone back and changed the ruling. Look, it happened with McCanty Sr. with Riddick Bowe and Buster Mathis Jr. Bowe hit Mathis when he was down and the whole bit. So yeah.
Yeah.
But
Speaking of a
Purple, it was not, but it was such a big fight at the Polo Grounds. My friend Don Majeski, who's been on our show, he's trying to get a plaque put up in Harlem where the Polo Grounds is located to honor the Firpo Dempsey fight. And they might be putting up a plaque there. He's been negotiating. He's offered to pay his own money. The area should make a big deal out of it, Frank. If we were ever around Shelby, Montana, I would want to make it a point to see Tommy Gibbons, Jack Dempsey, what it meant. Yeah.
Jack, speaking of fights where guys got knocked out of the ring, I was at the fight. I think it was 98 when Oleg Moskav knocked Hasim Rahman out of the ring, right onto the HBO crew. And that ended the fight. That is the only time I've ever seen that. And that was a clear punch. That's one of the best punches Moskav ever threw. But that's not something you see that much. Your instinct is to help the guy to get back in. Dempsey was the star, the man at that time. So, but yeah,
Frank,
you're right. I can't imagine a fight like that.
Frank, no one lifted Dempsey. No one grabbed his arms and put him on his feet. A shove doesn't really do anything to help you. I mean,
all that did was get him off them.
Yeah.
Look, Jack, the bottom line is they can say whatever they want. I watched the fight today for the purpose of this segment, and Dempsey recovered very quick. I mean, he got in the ring after that. He was really never close to going down again. I mean, I know there wasn't much time left in the round, but he recovered on his own, and Firpo couldn't finish him.
Think of how tough it is. We talk about the old timers and the modern athlete. How many of the modern athletes would absorb a fall like that? The great heavyweights today, if they fell out of the ring like that, chances are they just lie there and they would kind of wonder, how am I? Am I hurt? Am I this? Am I that?
Can I win by DQ?
Right, Dempsey had this animal instinct. How he physically recovered. He had no padding on his body. Can you imagine you're hitting your head, feet in the air, and getting knocked out, and getting back in the ring as quickly as he did and continuing the fight? But Dempsey reportedly said afterwards he didn't remember anything that happened after.
And he said Firpo was by clear the hardest puncher he ever fought.
Yeah, that Dempsey just was fighting on instinct after. But regardless, what a great fight. What a great shootout that fight was. I mean,
do you think Dempsey's a little underrated today, Jack?
Not as a fighter. I'll say this about Dempsey. He was the most exciting heavyweight in boxing history because of the way his fights turned out. Every fight had controversy to it. He knocked out an opponent in 18 seconds. Was it Fred Fulton? I forgot.
Fred Fulton.
Fulton, right, before winning the title. No one knocks out another contender in 18 seconds unless you're David Tu and John Ruiz. That was 19, I think. Then against Jess Willard, was his gloves loaded when he won the title? Hank Kaplan, I believe, said later on one of them was, but how would Hank have known, even though he was a great guy, the historian Hank Kaplan? Then he fights in Shelby, Montana, that controversy against Tommy Gibbons. The fight gets bankrupt. Jack Sharkey turns the complaint to the referee, and Dempsey hits him a shot and knocks him out. The long count.
Then the long count.
Funny. You had so many controversial fights happening. Dempsey was theater, top of the line theater. The first $1 million gig with Georges Compantier. You and I, Frank, if we were around in that time, we would have been sitting in the cheap seats. You know how far away that would have been without a score.
We wouldn't have seen the fight.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Jack, I guess that's about it. Well, next week we'll preview the Zhang Joyce fight. I think we might be on different sides of that. Give me a score on the football game tonight.
Philadelphia 37, Minnesota 20, something like that.
All right, so the Eagles cover the 7, basically.
Yeah, the Eagles cover the 7, yeah.
I agree with that. I hope we're both wrong. How's that?
Frank, we're going to be in a lot of trouble if we're predicting football games better than we are boxing.
Last week was not a good week for anybody, Jack. A lot of upsets.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay, well,
everybody.
enjoy
Thanks for watching. We will see
Thursday.
you